The Mississippi River, this is also incredible, has hit historic low levels due to the current drought.
On October 17, 2024, satellite images from NASA's Terra satellite revealed something that should not have been possible. Sections of the Mississippi River, some less than 3 feet deep, exposed sandbars unseen since records began in 1872. A decline that normally takes thousands of years happened in just 18 months. Barges carrying nearly 60% of America's grain exports were stranded, many resting on sandbars. A river that moves $700 billion in goods annually had shrunk to a trickle. Rainfall across the basin in 2023 was exactly average. The question is no longer whether the Mississippi is drying, but why the water is disappearing. Establishing the impossible deficit. The engineers of the Lower Mississippi River Division of the Army Corps of Engineers documented an impossible discrepancy in their gauge records. The water that entered the river at Cairo, Illinois, never arrived in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. It wasn't delayed or reduced in speed, it vanished. 200 billion gallons of water per day went missing between milepost 953 and milepost 233, or enough water to fill Lake Tahoe every 11 days. As a river ecologist, this was more than an unusual phenomenon. This observation contradicted the principle of conservation of mass. The Mississippi-Missouri River corridor drains 1.2 million square miles, representing 41% of the landmass of the continental United States, such that all water from Montana to Pennsylvania and from Alberta to the Gulf of Mexico contributes to a river-wide flow. Its network of 271 continuous gauging stations, maintained by the U.S. Geological Survey, provides data every 15 minutes since 1928 and is the most detailed river monitoring network. Water flows in, minus evaporation, minus water withdrawal, a balance that had existed for nearly a century. At Tarbert Landing, Louisiana, the last big stop before the Delta, the USGS gauges typically record a flow of 400,000 to 600,000 cubic feet per second, or an Olympic-sized pool of water every 3 seconds.
It's not like a pool where you can see a kid swimming in the water.
It drops off pretty fast.
Of course, it's moving water, so there's faster moving water, there can be currents.
The constant rhythm serves as the basis of all future contracts, barge prices, and water bonds allocated among 10 states. And the margin of error has continued to be below 12% since 1995. Over the last few decades, the Corps of Engineers has committed $15 billion to levees, spillways, and control structures, while the National Center of Atmospheric Research has been able to accurately model snowmelt, rainfall, and groundwater flow with 94% accuracy to estimate the water levels of the Mississippi River at locations hundreds of miles downstream to within 1 inch. The old river control structure, located at the confluence of the Mississippi and Atchafalaya rivers, is able to manage the flow of the Mississippi with such precision that the flow of the river is comparable to a well-functioning piece of machinery. The situation changed abruptly. When an anomaly revealed itself, scientists rushed to discover how much water was missing due to any known factor, and both organizations relied on their models that represented what was thought to be true until the point of discovery. As a result, as the Corps of Engineers and USGS continue to solve modern hydrology's explanations, both now have a great deal of work ahead. But if the river's flow can vanish without explanation, what unseen force could be swallowing billions of gallons of water? Unraveling the mystery. Dr. Amanda Winters, a hydrologist with the United States Geological Survey Water Science Center, located in Baton Rouge, first noticed the irregular reading last September 2023. Her group runs a monthly discharge measurement using acoustic Doppler current profilers, basically underwater sonar that takes readings of the velocity of the water flow all the way across the river. There just wasn't a way to make it add up. The volume of water that entered the Mississippi River at Memphis was 312,000 cubic feet per second. According to standard procedure, The team was expected to measure about 340,000 cubic feet per second at Baton Rouge a week thereafter, taking into consideration the contributory flows and evaporation. However, the team only recorded 287,000 cubic feet per second. A total of 53,000 cubic feet per second of this volume had disappeared over a distance of 600 miles of the river, which represented the total flow of the Colorado River. Dr. Winters assumed there was a problem with the instrument. Dr. Winters repaired and repeated tests and had samples checked for verification. All tests proved the same impossibility true. Water was being lost. By the end of December 2023, the rate of loss had risen to 89,000 cubic feet per second. By the end of March 2024, it jumped to 143,000 cubic feet per second. The Mississippi River was hemorrhaging discharge with an ever-quickening rate that defied any reduction in tributary discharge, upstream diversion, and increases in agricultural withdrawals.
So if we don't have barges available, that's a real problem, not just for America's farmers, but for the world, frankly.
In April of 2024, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers convened an Emergency Technical Review Board, consisting of 37 of the leading hydraulic engineers, geologists, and climatologists, to examine the data from all monitor points located between St. Louis and New Orleans, 18 months' worth of data. There was only one finding from their internal review report under the sustainability factor category. Measured losses far exceed natural variability and any known human extractions at a magnitude of 6.7 to 1. For many years, researchers have dedicated themselves to studying the Mississippi and, as a result, can no longer provide definitive conclusions from the traditional hydrology perspective. Researchers have begun using hesitant language to communicate their interpretations of the data that continues to be problematic. If what you see in the data is correct, we have an example of a redistribution of groundwater that's not consistent with what we know about the aquifers in the area, stated Dr. Winters during a closed symposium at Tulane University. If this is happening, then every hydrology textbook you have on North America is erroneous. But if these anomalies are real, could the Mississippi's hidden water secrets be rewriting the rules of hydrology itself? Theories used. The first category of higher agricultural withdrawals included $60 billion of agricultural output in the Mississippi River on a year-round basis. Much of the projected irrigation use for Arkansas rice acres and Louisiana sugarcane manufacturing will require large amounts of water. A study by scientists from the U.S. Geological Survey on Hydration Aquifers provides information based on groundwater data collected from 14,000 agricultural wells over the last 90 days, providing the first indication of the amount of groundwater being used by agriculture in 2023. Which is 8.1 billion gallons per day of water. This number represents a significant portion of all groundwater used. However, it is approximately half of the total reported groundwater withdrawal for agriculture. Since the projected reduction in agricultural acreage for cotton production has occurred from cotton acres due to 2023 lower cotton acres compared to 2019 lower cotton acres. Lower agricultural withdrawal volume in 2023 can't be lower than agricultural withdrawals that occurred in 2019 due to a lack of information and knowledge regarding agricultural water use. Theory 2 was concerned with evapotranspiration, evaporation, and the uptake of water. Researchers employed satellite imaging and thermal analysis by a system called EcoSTES, which is used to calculate evaporation. In this case, researchers observed that evapotranspiration during 2023 and 2024 was 2.3% greater than the 30-year mean. In other words, evaporation has increased slightly, but not nearly enough to cover the difference. A difference of such a small amount would increase evaporation by a mean amount of 4,000 cubic feet per second, but not 143,000 cubic feet per second. The researchers analyzed Theory 3 via a geophysical study of the subsurface geological structures of the lower Mississippi River Basin. The study was a partnership between Tulane University and the University of Memphis. The primary purpose was to identify the presence of new karst features, large underground cavities connected by surface openings through which water could be draining into deeper aquifers. The lower Mississippi River Basin is underlain by a variety of limestone bedrock types that make up the karst structure. For example, Tennessee and Arkansas contain numerous vertical and horizontal faults that would have allowed water to flow into previously sequestered deep rock aquifers. To accomplish this, the research team designed an extensive seismic survey to identify the geologic structures and their extent from Memphis to Vicksburg. A total of 127 seismic sensors were installed in a grid-like arrangement along the banks of the river. Using controlled vibrations to generate vibrations in the earth, the investigators were able to create acoustic profiles of the Earth's subsurface down to a depth of 2,000 feet. Although the study yielded surprising results, none of them were the desired outcome of discovering new, large karst structures. Likewise, no major fracture zones existed in or above the confining clay layer separating the alluvial aquifer from the deep bedrock aquifers. Furthermore, the geologic formations of the Mississippi River Basin remained unchanged from previous investigations conducted during 1997 and 2012, except, of course, for one aspect. It turned out that the seismic information indicated a higher porosity of the alluvial deposits immediately beneath the riverbed, and this was in the unconsolidated deposits of sand and gravel that compose a riverbed and not in the bedrock. Porosity relates to how many voids exist in sediment. Normally, typical values of 28 to 33% porosity exist in deposits of this sort at points underneath the Mississippi River, which translates to about a third of its bulk consisting of voids able to be filled by water. However, values of 41 to 47% were recorded in areas extending from 60 to 120 feet below points at the bottom of the riverbed in 2024. It's as if the sediments were becoming sponge-like. Dr. Michael Reeves, a sedimentologist at Mississippi State University, explained this anomaly, saying, "They are witnessing a structural reorganization of the sediment at this point. Nothing has happened to the sediment itself. It's just reorganized to provide a vastly greater amount of voids that provide a much greater amount of water. It's as if the riverbed were digging itself out from inside. However, porosity doesn't account for a loss of water. Higher porosity means more water can be stored in sediment. But unless there is somewhere for that water to go, it eventually reaches saturation, and flow continues downstream, unless something is pulling water out of the aquifer as fast as the river can feed it." Theory 4 examined exactly that possibility. The Memphis Sand Aquifer and the Mississippi River Valley Alluvial Aquifer together supply drinking water for 8 million people across Arkansas, Mississippi, Louisiana, and Tennessee. Both aquifers have been subjected to municipal and agricultural pumping since the 1960s, resulting in declining water tables. Hydrologists refer to this as induced recharge when groundwater pumping creates a hydraulic gradient that pulls water from a connected surface water body into the aquifer.
We need months of normal rainfall to recharge the soil and the river systems.
It's a known mechanism. What wasn't known was the scale. The USGS Memphis office analyzed water table elevations from 892 monitoring wells in the alluvial aquifer. The data showed a systematic decline across the entire lower Mississippi Valley. Water tables in 2024 averaged 23 feet lower than 1990 levels. That declining gradient creates suction. The river, encountering sediments with increased porosity and an aquifer with reduced head pressure, starts recharging the aquifer at accelerated rates. The numbers finally balanced. Groundwater withdrawal increased, ground porosity increased, and the level of the aquifer declined. That equals induced recharge at a catastrophic level. The Mississippi River was not drying out for lack of precipitation. It was bleeding into its own groundwater system. Each stratum of verification only raised further questions. On the one hand, if the above explanation is true, it means that the entire last 100 years of projects, dams, levees, channel stabilization efforts, and agricultural development have essentially made a hydrologic trap. Each system for controlling the river, each well that has been drilled for agriculture or urban supplies, has cumulatively changed the very dynamic for the relationship between surface water and groundwater. We have not broken the river on a single catastrophic course of action. We have rewritten the hydrologic rules of the river into 10,000 smaller ones. But if these hidden shifts beneath the riverbed are relentless, what unseen tipping point could soon unleash devastation above? The ecological consequences. The signs of ecological damage are first showing up again in the lower Mississippi River country of Louisiana, which has one of the richest fishing areas on Earth.
Probably like everyone who didn't grow up on the Mississippi, my early impression was probably reading Tom Sawyer or Huck Finn.
Paddlefish, channel catfish, bass, and 120 other fish species count on specific flow patterns to survive. Because flows have been maintained at less than 300,000 cubic feet per second, the dissolved oxygen levels have dropped to almost zero. By June of 2024, the Louisiana Department of Wildlife and Fisheries noted a 64% decline in commercial landings of channel catfish and widespread fish kills in the backwater bayous between Natchez and Reserve, Louisiana. Furthermore, paddlefish larvae from many subsequent generations were completely lost due to insufficient velocity of flow in some of their spawning streams. Bottomland hardwood trees that line the banks of the river, aka riparian forests, are also in trouble. They depend upon annual flood pulse events to regenerate. Without the floods causing riparian hardwoods to grow, invasive species are taking over native plants, and native species are not germinating or growing due to a lack of flood pulses. The negative impact of this ecological collapse eventually spills over into economic impacts. For example, while the Mississippi River carries an average of 500 million tons of freight per year in barge cargo shipments, each foot of reduction in river depth results in decreased cargo capacity. A standard barge that usually hauls 1,500 tons at an 11-foot draft could carry just 1,000 tons at 9 feet. In August 2024, shipping companies had cut loads on average by 35%. Shipping costs for grain from Iowa to Louisiana export terminals surged 71%. All costs farmers absorbed through lower commodity prices and consumers paid for in higher food prices. Ingram Barge Company, one of the largest operators, idled 38% of its fleet, and 4 smaller companies filed for bankruptcy. Cargo volume dropped 41% in the third quarter of 2024 at the Port of South Louisiana, the Western Hemisphere's largest tonnage port. Every million lost tons equates to $120 million in economic activity and 400 jobs. Municipal water systems began entering a crisis. Memphis withdraws 180 million gallons per day from the Memphis Sand Aquifer, and New Orleans withdraws 130 million gallons daily from the alluvial aquifer. Across the Mississippi River Delta, communities relied on groundwater for all their water on groundwater. But as groundwater levels decreased, it became more expensive to pump it. Cities reported a 40% rise in water treatment charges to dig deeper wells and employ more powerful pumps. In July of 2024, 3 Louisiana parishes mandated water conservation. Memphis asked people to avoid excessive irrigation of lawns, and Vicksburg, Mississippi, halted new commercial construction that would increase water demand. This indirect effect of groundwater depletion came home to people as a gradual squeeze of the economy for communities that have lived with the Mississippi River hydrology for 2 centuries. Insurers began to recalculate agricultural and flood insurance risks. Bond ratings for municipal water services in the lower Mississippi Valley were lowered. Real estate in riverbank communities decreased in value as potential homebuyers questioned water rights to this land. A quiet drama unfolded. But could these bold measures arrive in time, or would the river's slow retreat reshape life forever? Struggles for solutions, uncertain future. On September 1st, 2024, the Army Corps of Engineers announced a new initiative to aid recovery efforts.
The Army Corps of Engineers Lance Engels says the Potter's 3 crews are dredging around the clock to keep the river open
along the Mississippi River. This initiative included significant components aimed at decreasing the extraction rate of groundwater through state-mandated conservation laws, restoring wetlands for water capture and storage, and changing dam operations to increase their release rates into the river, and investing $2.3 billion into modifying channels to decrease recharge to the area from induced storage. Representatives of agribusiness from 7 different states convened in Memphis to discuss how the new initiative would be implemented across their states. All agreed to work together. Support was pledged from the National Corn Growers Association, the American Soybean Association, and the USA Rice Federation. It was believed that river farmers could ultimately eliminate many of their irrigated crops if they adopted more efficient irrigation practices and selected less water-demanding crops for future growth. The Corps forecast that a 20% reduction in agricultural use of groundwater acres, in combination with improved upstream releases from Missouri River reservoirs, would result in restoring approximately 40,000 cubic feet per second of river flow to downstream locations within 18 months of implementing the initiative. In theory, this initiative was based on sound science. Memphis Mayor Paul Young announced that his city would invest $75 million in water infrastructure projects, including new high-tech metering and leak detection systems, which are expected to reduce the municipal water demand by 15%. Additionally, Louisiana Governor Jeff Landry signed an executive order establishing the Mississippi River Sustainability Task Force and giving the task force the ability to place emergency water restrictions on municipalities should the situation deteriorate further. Congress approved an $800 million drought relief fund for farmers and ranchers in drought-stricken areas of the United States. Excitement for the funding was high. It appeared that the engineering calculations were accurate, and there was sufficient political will to ensure that the funding would be implemented. The public sector message promoted both recovery and stability. The Public Affairs Office of the Corps of Engineers issued a statement reiterating that the Corps of Engineers has been managing the Mississippi River for 100 years and possesses the tools and expertise to restore balance. As a result, those who depend on the river began to develop their plans in accordance with the expectation of stabilization. Barge companies put off upgrading their equipment, thinking that the barge industry would return to normal operation by 2026. Farmers planted 2,025 crops on the assumption that they would receive their irrigation allotments as projected. Water utilities created 20-year capital improvement plans based on the assumption that their aquifers would recover. Additionally, the increased confidence of the public in the management of the Mississippi River reflected a history of success. American engineers have previously addressed huge water issues. Examples include the Colorado River Compact, the California State Water Project, and the Tennessee Valley Authority. The Mississippi River Recovery Initiative is also an example of that capacity. Tradition is based on assumptions, while the history of the assumptions made about complex hydrology systems is filled with failed and unanticipated results. The first signs of cracks in the understanding of these systems occurred in the month of November 2024. Lowering the amount of groundwater extracted by farmers, transitioning to using surface water directly from the Mississippi River and its tributaries. The modeling performed by the Corps indicated that the Corps was aware of this change in farmers' actions. However, the Corps had not anticipated the speed of development. Although June through August is the height of irrigation demand, the farmers began building infrastructure projects in May 2024 in anticipation of water extraction restrictions. There were 2,700 new permits issued for the construction of new surface intake facilities in the states of Arkansas, Mississippi, and Louisiana. During low-flow conditions, surface water direct withdrawals removed water that would have otherwise flowed downriver to downstream users. There is a zero-sum competition between surface water withdrawals from the river system and the aquifer and recharge of that groundwater supplied from the river system. The decline of the aquifer continued even as the wetland restoration project produced many cases of unanticipated outcomes. The purpose of restored wetlands is to capture water while they sit on top of the aquifer system in the lower Mississippi River Valley. The wetlands were responsible for recharging the aquifer rather than for holding onto water until a later time to disperse it to the river. The volume of each gallon stored in a wetland that has been recreated is the same as 1 gallon of the amount that is draining into the earth underneath the restored wetland. Dr. Winters identified this as an issue at the time in December. As Dr. Winters said, "We have created hydrological sumps, and the restored wetlands are accelerating the recharge of the aquifer instead of buffering variation in flow. While providing higher volumes of water in a shorter time to the river creates short-lived increases in river levels near Memphis, these volumes of water never reach New Orleans. It merely speeds up the recharging of the aquifers through the very high permeability riverbed sedimentary layers of the Mississippi River. With the introduction of every additional type of intervention, more avenues for drained water leakage were formed. As a result, in February 2025, the river discharge at Tarbert Landing reached 214,000 cubic feet per second, creating the lowest reading recorded since records have been kept. The Corps quietly revised the technical wording contained in their technical documents. Whereas the original reference to the time frame of restoration became adaptive management strategies, references to discussions regarding restoration became sustainable reduction scenarios. Also, the Memphis Sand Aquifer Monitoring Network recorded that the rate of decline was increasing in March 2025. Wells that were declining at a rate of 6 feet annually from 2010 through 2020 were now declining at a rate of 14 feet per year. There was no indication that the aquifer had begun to rebound. Rather, the conditions had changed so that the recharge presented by the river, through a combination of bank storage and river discharge, was in excess of the capacity of the aquifer to distribute the recharged water away from the river. The water was present in the aquifer and would continue to be available for river recharges, but would not be recoverable through wells due to the design of those wells to recover water that was being discharged along an alluvial aquifer way. Engineers characterized that state of a water body as a storage deadlock. The hydraulic system contains water but is located in areas that cannot be used by either humans or nature. The efforts thus far intended to control the system have created second-order issues. The communities of Louisiana, in proximity to the Gulf Coast, are experiencing an additional problem. Because of the decreased flow of river water, the river is unable to push saline water from the Gulf of Mexico back beyond the barriers during periods of high flow. In early 2025, municipal sources of drinking water in Bellechasse and Braithwaite, Louisiana, exhibited the presence of salt water. As many as 80,000 people lost access to drinking water. Desalination units, which were part of the federal emergency response system, were quickly deployed. Are we truly addressing the problem or merely deferring it? This question has begun to circulate within key team conversations as we move toward our final paper submission date. As Dr. Reeves has pointed out, and we are beginning to recognize, the river is more than simply a channel for water. It is a complex interface connecting surface water flow, subsurface water flow, sediment transport, and the biogeochemical cycle. Each time an engineer modifies one part of a large system, they change the way it interacts with other components in ways that they do not fully comprehend. In the beginning, these projects were conceived as reasonable and pragmatic responses to each of the specific problems that needed to be solved. They were intended to address flood control, navigation, and the provision of water supply for human and industrial uses, as well as agriculture. The madness of these projects stemmed from the belief that it was possible to modify one part of the system without triggering domino effects throughout interconnected systems on a timescale greater than that of an organization. The Mississippi River is still withdrawing from the banks of the upstream and downstream waterway in a slow but increasing manner.
To travel down the Mississippi is to gain a new appreciation of America and its history.
Currently, measurement systems provide continual, accurate reports of the upriver retreat. However, that accuracy does not translate into a workable solution for the problem. The Corps continues to hold on to the recovery program, as abandoning it would be to acknowledge a more substantial problem than what is being dealt with now. We have constructed a system that has become so intricate that we no longer possess the ability to manage it, nor do we have the capability to abandon it, as it is too critical to our survival. At present, the primary question is not whether or not the Mississippi River will be able to regain its former flow regimes. Rather, it will be what new equilibrium it will reach, how long such a process will require, and who will ultimately pay for the mistakes of making decisions when there was so little known about the results of the actions. The Mississippi River supports 10 million people with its water, and $200 billion in annual economic activity depends on its navigable depths. There are more than 400 different species of fish, birds, and other animals that require specific flows of water to survive. The systems we have constructed to manage the river, the levees that hold floodwaters back, the dams that store excess water, the municipal groundwater wells, and the navigation channels for barge traffic, have permanently changed how water flows through the largest watershed in North America. We are beginning to understand that rivers do not react to human engineering on the same timescale as we think. Rather, they think about geological time and climatic time, and they must consider the sum total of every human decision to engineer a river over the course of 10 decades. Are we adapting to the changes that have occurred as a result of these decisions, or are we creating a facade of confidence by using scientific terms and developing 5-year plans for our responses? The ongoing satellite data collection, along with data from the aquifer monitoring wells and discharge gauges, continues to show that the numbers are different from what was predicted by the models. And somewhere below the surface of the riverbed, in the pore spaces between the sand grains deposited by glaciers when they last melted, there are 200 billion gallons of water being condensed into an aquifer that will not release them for potentially hundreds of years. The drying of the Mississippi River is not due to our failure to identify the risk of drying out. Rather, it is due to our success in creating conditions that assured the dysfunction of the river will continue to grow. The actual cost of having believed that we possess the ability to command forces of nature that existed long before we were a technologically developed society and created an understanding of what we call control will, in the end, will be ours to bear. There are no answers to this question, only a gradual loss of water in the Mississippi River, which has replaced the once thriving river community. Thank you for watching today's video. Feel free to share your thoughts with us, your thoughts in the comment section down below. Don't forget to also like, share, and subscribe to our channel.